So welcome everyone to this Planet M production. Our topic is urbanization, solving transportation woes through autonomy, smart cities. I am John Paracchio, and I am here in really two capacities. First, I chair something called the Michigan Council on Future Mobility. The council is a creature of state law. We're within the Michigan Department of Transportation. And we have statutory responsibility to advise the governor and the legislature on policies related to the development of technologies associated with autonomous, highly automated, connected vehicles and enhancing personal mobility. In addition, I have a day job, which is as General Manager of Mobility Solutions and Strategy for Conduent Transportation. And I think we have a few slides on Conduent Transportation here coming up. There we go. Next slide, please. So just a couple of quick observations. A lot of people are living in cities and more are on the way. We estimate by 2050, 70% of the world's population will be in cities. Complicating that is that road accidents worldwide account for 1.25 million deaths each year. We believe there must be a path to progress. There we go. This is probably hard to read. Yeah. So just a note that governments, transportation agencies, and authorities are all wrestling with congestion issues. They're wrestling with a carbon footprint issue. They're wrestling with how best to move people across transportation modes. Next slide. So we see some barriers to seamless transportation. Certainly a lack of personalization. You're not always treated as you would like to be as you travel. There's lag and latency associated with transportation that needs to be addressed. And we have systems that don't learn very well, and that's got to change. Next slide. We believe that digital interactions will become the norm. And digital interactions means that you can have a seamless travel experience across modes, especially paying for it, identifying it, reserving it. All of that needs to be digitized and collected. The transactions and the travel planning need to be collected into the cloud and made available to you. Next slide. So Conduent, for those of you who don't know, provides electronic tolling services, parking management, public safety, and transit fare collection systems. We're a part of a publicly held company, Conduent Inc., traded on the New York Stock Exchange. Our call sign is CNDT. Next slide. We can skip this. Thank you so much, and I want to turn it over now to our first panelist, who will be Frank Scambetti of Bosch. Frank.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Frank Scambetti, Director of Business Development for Bosch Smart Cities. So I think that's why they threw Smart Cities at the end of the title in order to ensure I was okay. But so my responsibility is to develop a go-to-market strategy for the Bosch Group. I'm part of a global team. Many of you may know Bosch from our mobility sector. It's one of our largest sectors, but we also are involved in consumer goods, industry 4.0, and then also in the what I would call building and energy sector. So I'm glad to be here, John.
Excellent. Carrie Morton.
Well, I'm really happy to be here with this great panel. So I'm Carrie Morton, and I'm the Deputy Director of M-City, and I have to say this is a lot of fun being here at Automobility. I think back to being an undergrad at U of M in mechanical engineering, and we would load cars full of our friends to come down here and see all the cool new cars. Never in a million years did I believe I'd be here talking about the future of cars without a driver. So M-City, for those of you who aren't familiar with what we do, we're a public-private partnership at the University of Michigan, and we partner with dozens of companies to look at the future of mobility as it's related to connected and automated vehicles. And we look at pre-competitive barriers and share a large, diverse research portfolio that really leverages the breadth of research at the university, including legal and liability issues, cybersecurity, human factors, the full gamut. And then we underpin that with deployments of the technology in our purpose-built test facility, as well as on-road deployments on campus. And so we're excited to be here.
Excellent. So our final panelist is Neville Boston from Reviver Auto.
Yes, I'm Neville Boston. I am the co-founder and CEO of Reviver Auto, soon to be Reviver. We do digital license plates, so we're the world's first digital license plate maker, but I look at it more as a communications portal. We've been working in the state of California since 2008, initially rolling it out, and I have some exciting things to announce, I think, later today, but what it's looking like right now is that we passed legislation in California and Florida, Texas. Arizona is fully authorized. There will be an announcement about Michigan. But I think what we're doing differently is we're taking something that is standard on all vehicles and making it always connected and smart. When you start thinking about compliance and you start thinking about how we interact, whether it be AVs or EVs, it's a way in which you can standardize how the communication should look. So we're really excited about kind of what's going on. We've been working with states. I think it's a true public-private partnership where we're working in concert together to develop a solution I think that would work overall. So.
Excellent. So I'd like to begin the discussion. And by the way, I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then I'd like to turn it over to the folks in the audience if you have questions. And I'll repeat it so that we can record it and everyone can hear. But I'd like to start with the topic. Surprise. I outlined in the conduit transportation slides some of the woes of urbanization: congestion, safety issues for pedestrians, for bicyclists, for people riding scooters. Detroit is Scooter City, in case you didn't know. And so let's put it out there. How can autonomous vehicles and the technologies that enable these vehicles, how can they help us with these woes of urbanization? Anybody?
Well, I think you mentioned the three major outcome areas of M-City, which is we want to make sure we can have safer, more efficient transportation that's accessible for everyone. And often one of the friction points in an urban environment is that first mile, last mile. And if we can deploy automated vehicles in such a way that they can plug into an existing system and get more people off of congested roadways, then we're already winning. So I think being able to make them part of the system, having them as a standalone standalone solution, I don't think really works. They need to be part of a mobility ecosystem.
Oh, Frank, how about a little artificial intelligence and some machine learning?
What about that?
What about that? How about if we have some?
Sure, I think we need some, actually.
Yeah.
So where I would say there's going to be a convergence. There's a convergence of smart infrastructure. There's going to be a convergence with smart cities. Bosch, as many know, are developing a lot of connected and automated, let's say, solutions for vehicle-based, whether it's for traditional passenger cars, whether it's for even shuttles. So last week at CES, I know I'm not supposed to say CES here, we introduced the IoT shuttle. And it's really a shuttle, and it was really a showcase of all the different services, solutions from electric mobility to connected mobility to autonomy that we can offer our customers. So where I'm going to take it, I'm going to deviate from that. I'm coming from the smart cities perspective. We definitely will see urban needs for autonomy and connected vehicles, first mile, last mile. But where I would say another position that Bosch is going to be placed in is in the infrastructure side. So we have traditional security cameras, which we are now calling video as a sensor. So as you start to increase the intelligence of your infrastructure, you can do things like smart parking solutions. You can do things like even, I would call the term curbside management, if anybody understands that, where you can actually take the curb, which today is, let's say, heavily weighted towards pedestrians, but now scooters, and then even, with ride sharing, people are dropping off and picking up at the curb. This is becoming a piece of real estate that really needs intelligence to be able to manage. And taking all of that infrastructure and communicating that directly to the vehicle is really what we're all about. And I think that's where I would see this convergence between smart infrastructure, smart cities, and how that will bring the autonomy to urban centers.
So Neville, you have a digital license plate. That implies a new form of connectivity, vehicle to infrastructure communication. Maybe you could elaborate.
It's interesting. One of the things that I notice when we're having conversations about, smart cities, smart infrastructure, the thing that always sticks with me is like who's spending the money on it? Who's actually going to be willing to put the capital that's needed in order to make it a reality? One of the things that we're doing right now is that we're working in Dubai on a proof of concept with their smart city initiative. They want to be the first smart city in the world, and they're actually putting real money behind it and actually make it a.
Oh wow!
Oh, I
plate.
like that license plate. Neville.
Yeah.
Well done.
How
well
cool!
Done.
How cool is that, folks?
Yeah, let me put this down here.
Yeah.
Quick. So that's one of the things that they're actually really looking at. It's like how do we integrate? Because within the plate, we'll have Bluetooth, we have RFID, we have an accelerometer, and and we also have a LTE module. So you're able to connect to everything around you, and then how do you integrate it? What does it actually look like? So I mean, what we're looking at is that we're developing partnerships, with states, but also companies like Bosch to be able to work in concert to be able to bring those solutions to fore. But I think the big thing that we really need to think about is that we talk about it, whether it be people spending money on autonomous vehicles or other things like that. Who's actually spending the money? How are we funding it to actually make it a reality? Because we can talk about it, but if we're not putting any money behind it, it's not real. So I think those are the things that we're really looking at is how do we integrate in a way that's efficient, but we're also being smart about what we're building out.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this, a truly leading question. Clearly, for a smart city to function effectively, we have to look at the user experience, the ultimate user, the driver,
Absolutely.
the user, the traveler. We need to think about issues like accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
We need to think about social equity. We need to be very inclusive. So how can some of these technologies address those policy and business realities?
So one of the things that we're doing is that with our plates, we're setting it up to where, especially in California, I'm sure that it's other states, but their VLF fees, the vehicle licensing fees are really high. Because we have real-time compliance on our plate, we can actually have that be amortized over 12 months. So you can start paying monthly instead of yearly. So that's a way of driving that cost down. And then starting to work with parking aggregators, also with bridge tolls to actually put together a platform where you can support all these different things that you want to do. Mm-hmm. But then also listening to what's needed and being willing to work collaboratively with cities and with states to help build out structures that actually work for the populace. Mm-hmm. And look at where they're having issues, whether it be vehicle miles traveled when you're talking about infrastructure, mm-hmm. how that's actually being paid for. If you're using electric vehicles and AVs, who's actually paying for the gas tax that we have? How is the infrastructure being, updated? So starting to think about creative ways to be able to address those actual needs.
Yeah, maybe a different approach that I would take is some of the things that we're doing at Bosch. Again, on the vehicle side, on the autonomy of mobility services and solutions. If you take the announcement we did in San Jose in California. Mm-hmm. So we're actually partnering with the city. So we have our OEM partner Daimler, which we had announced this project about 18 months ago. Mm-hmm. Beginning of this year, we talked about now we're actually going to do some real, I would say, demonstrations. And this is it's kind of like a public-private partnership directly with the city of San Jose. to be able to prove out and understand some of those UX principles you talked about. We want to get that real feedback from the actual users and the people that are actually driving in these automated, in this case, this is automated taxis. So the IoT shuttle that I mentioned to you, part of the reason we set it up at CES like we did was to really get the feedback, to really get the understanding. It gives you that experience when you're sitting in the shuttle. You get to simulate what the experience could be in an automated vehicle and understand what are the services and other solutions we can offer. So it's not just all about all the bits and pieces that can go into the automated vehicle, but it's the experience and how the users are going to react to that. And then I would say on the infrastructure side, an area that we are active is in the Smart Columbus. So they have the Smart Mobility Corridor. What they're creating there is a 35-mile stretch of a connected and automated vehicle corridor that is going to allow to prove out technology and infrastructure. And that'll allow us, again, to understand how the user experience in a real highway experience is going to, how is it going to affect the autonomy, not just the autonomy piece, but the connected piece. So this is, I would say, a couple areas. Again, on the infrastructure side, with some of our intelligent cameras, this is what we're using in the Smart Columbus or the Smart Mobility Corridor, and then also a little bit on the connected vehicle side. So these are the areas, the mobility vehicle side and the infrastructure side is what we're kind of looking at it from both angles.
So Carrie, if we think about the user, we want to be very careful in how we roll out these technologies, and we want to make sure that we do our research and development in a thoughtful, safe, and effective way. So maybe you could comment a little bit on, R&D and testing.
Sure. I think it's important to, while there's a promise of safety and efficiency and better mobility, 45,000 or around 45,000 people lose their lives every year in traffic accidents. But if you take the converse, we're actually pretty good at driving. Around 1 fatality per 100 million miles. I think it's decreasing slightly, or maybe around 90 million miles. So what that tells us is we still have a lot to learn, and public trust is a really important step forward. So how do we approach that at M-City? Well, a couple of things. We're doing a lot of work in our ultimate sandbox in a safe, repeatable, and reliable way to understand the capabilities of these technologies and where there may be challenges and how we can work towards solutions to overcome them. Outside of M-City, we've also deployed 2 low-speed driverless shuttles. And this was, again, all about trust and the user experience. So that the purpose wasn't actually to provide a mobility service, as it turns out. That might not be intuitive. But what we wanted to do was provide an experience for the consumers to understand how their level of trust changes over time and how other road users interact with these vehicles. So we take a very careful, measured approach. And what we learned from that experience was there was no good way to demonstrate safety other than through our experience with the shuttles inside M-City, even to our own administration at the university. We ran a number of tests. We simulated the exact scenarios the shuttle would encounter on the roadway in its operational design domain, and that is what led us yesterday at M-City to announce the concept of ABC testing, which we believe has the possibility to become the foundation for a voluntary set of testing standards so that we can help build public trust in these technologies. But it will take testing in closed facilities, on-road testing, as well as simulation combined to really prove these out. It's a lot of work.
So one final question, then I'll turn it over to the audience. About 20% of the population does not have reliable access to personal transportation today. The elderly, the disabled, also folks who are disadvantaged socioeconomically. If we put all of those people into autonomous vehicles, one person, one vehicle, we're going to have 20% more congestion, aren't we? So maybe we could talk for a minute about shared mobility as being an important concept when we talk about autonomous.
Maybe I can start. So there's a couple things that we're doing at Bosch to try and understand, shared mobility and how that could impact the urban environment. One good example is in Berlin. About 2 years ago, we stood up a subsidiary called Coop. And what it is, it's a ride-sharing e-scooter program. We've since actually now launched it to Paris and Madrid, and we've seen a tremendous amount of interest. So here we are, you're feeding into the sustainability of the city because this is an e-scooter, it's electric, but it also feeds into the shared mobility pieces. So what it does, it's more of trying to take advantage of a shared mobility solution versus adding more vehicles to the environment, I think is one example. Another example I'll bring up is that recently Bosch actually acquired a company called Split. And this is a ride-sharing pooled company. So this is exactly what you're talking about, John. So how it
Split,
works.
and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but Split, you don't really need autonomous vehicles for that.
No.
You can take a bite out of congestion
We're doing it today.
today.
Yeah,
with Split.
we're doing it today. And basically what it is you take it, a business owner would somehow give all of their associates the app to be able to somehow carpool together, all through a shared app and a kind of a shared mobility experience. So those are just a couple of the examples.
That's great.
I'm excited to say, Frank, 4 years ago, we awarded Split a Moby Prize for their innovation and mobility. So
Actually, Bosch was a grant recipient of the Michigan Mobility Challenge.
Exactly, yeah,
up
that
in
was a recent.
Traverse City, right?
Very grateful to the state of Michigan, because, and that's actually in rural environments.
Yes.
So it's
Great.
it's a rural environment to help shared mobility services.
Neville.
It's interesting. We in California, there's two car sharing companies. One is Envoy, one is Wavecar,
Right.
and we have our plates on those vehicles. And they're I think it's neat because you're able to utilize the car, I believe, for the first 2 hours, and it's free. And their big thing is making sure the cars are on the road,
Right.
because how they make their money is advertising. So it's a way in which people can get access to a vehicle, have it for a couple hours, and be able to get around. So it seems to be working out really well.
Plus, with your connectivity, I mean, you've got Bluetooth, you've got RFID.
Yep.
You are really an enabler of shared mobility because of the connectivity.
Absolutely, and some of the things that they're looking to put on the car is also like, what is the charge? You know, so you'll be able to access that, and then be able to put a person's name on the vehicle when you walk up, so you know which vehicle you're getting in. So things like that to help streamline the process.
It's more of this user experience interacting with the public, right?
Absolutely.
It's great.
So, questions from the audience? Anyone want to? Because I have lots of questions, so I can go. Yes, ma'am.
I got a couple quick ones. You remember when you were younger and it was Saturday and Friday night and you had the old muscle cars and you were racing and...
Oh, that's me. Yeah.
Why are you taking that away from the kids? Because they're not going to be able to enjoy that like you guys did when you were young kids. Like, did you not have a happy childhood? No, I'm just kidding.
Well,
and then the other thing, like, I live on a farm.
Answer to that. But
Yeah,
I'm gonna
let's
carry-
answer that.
Yeah, let's answer that question.
As a
So what I'm
former-
going to do in the future is I'm going to go to M City, or I'm going to go to the American Center for Mobility, and I'm going to take my hot rod and I'm going to really experience it.
Oh, okay, well.
And then the other thing, living on a farm, sometimes there's poachers like way out on the back 40. And right now I can't get a car that I can drive and put in to drive that doesn't have the lights on. So it's kind of hard to sneak up on somebody if you got your headlights on. And so all this invasion of my privacy and going off my road, now how am I going to go off into the back 40 when my cars keep saying off-road, off-road? We don't recognize where you are. Okay, there you go. But everybody don't live in the city.
That's right. So as a former engine calibrator and car enthusiast, I can say for a very long time, there will still be a need for human-driven vehicles. And the rural environment, which can be challenging and unforgiving, is the exact example I give. When people say, well, if there's too much snow and an automated car can't operate, well, a human shouldn't either. And I know Frank went to school up north in the UP, so he can appreciate. You still need to get around when there are 2 feet of snow in one day. So I don't think this means the end of manually driven vehicles. I think it means the advent of other opportunities, but we will have that mix for some time.
So John mentioned the 20%. So I know 2 of those folks, my dad and my stepfather. They can't drive any longer, 87 and 88 years old. The hope would be in the future with automated vehicles, whether it's a shuttle or some kind of a vehicle, they could actually get out and get mobile again. I mean, today it's not quite there yet, But in the future, that's one of the hopes. And I think the other thing about your concerns with rural areas, you're talking about maps, and you're talking about the ability, automated and connected vehicles are going to need to work with highly defined maps, even in the rural areas. One of the things that we actually announced or talked about is with vehicles that are driving around today, with radar sensors and camera sensors on them, we can actually map a little bit of the road work and provide that information to the highly defined maps and add that to rural areas so that you can eventually someday drive in an automated vehicle.
I'm sorry?
Here's something somebody can invent. I have 9 dogs. A pet caddy that will automatically take my dogs to the vet. There, now we're talking.
Maybe we need somebody from pedestrian. They have those little robots that run on the curb. Just a quick note on mapping. The Council on Future Mobility here in Michigan has sponsored a public-private partnership to create a hyper-accurate, high-definition map of the state's roadways, and will be available to any public or private entity that would like to do research and development here in the state of Michigan. It's very, very important. One question has occurred to me over the last couple years, and it's related to the fact that the gods of the auto industry have decided that autonomous vehicles are going to be electrified. They're going to have electricity to power them. There's a challenge there, which is we do not have much of an EV, electric vehicle charging infrastructure available here, anywhere. Even in California, where arguably they have the most built-out electric vehicle charging infrastructure, it really just scratches the surface. Now, it's true, less than 3% of the world's new vehicle sales are electric vehicles, but if we're going to move to an autonomous world, how are we going to build out that infrastructure? How are we going to pay for it?
Well, I think actually we have a convergence. You know, we're going to see early deployments in urban environments that are going to be dedicated to certain routes. And that is a great opportunity for a public-private partnership around infrastructure.
Absolutely.
As we establish these early deployments.
It's one of the things that I think technology companies can actually work with the state on to figure out where that is. And I think the same way that they've invested in other industries, it's an investment that's going to have to be made, like they did in solar. You've got to put money behind it if you want to build out that infrastructure.
And maybe solar is part of the answer. Batteries that are no longer suitable for electric vehicles are actually still capable of holding a charge, somewhere around 70 to 80%.
Right.
And you could probably combine solar with those batteries to make EV charging more readily available, because the charging units themselves, right, don't cost a lot of money, but getting the power to the charging station could cost a lot of money. Yes, sir.
I have 2 questions. One, there's such fascination with autonomous vehicles. Occasionally there's talk about autonomous shuttles. Public transit, especially in larger cities, moves huge numbers of people economically and equitably. And I have deep concerns that with our total fascination, I would say obsession with autonomous vehicles, we're forgetting about how we're going to move those large numbers of people in those growing cities around in a manner that they can afford and that we can afford in terms of the public fisc. The second question, totally different, is elderly and autonomous vehicles. I have grave misgivings about your parents being picked, I don't know their particular health conditions, but being picked up by a driverless vehicle. Let's say one of them has a walker or wheelchair, doesn't quite know where that person's going. There's merit to be had in having a driver actually meet elderly people, and you can do that today. So I'm just curious about whether we're creating a solution for a problem that doesn't exist.
No, go ahead, Carrie.
I would say, you heard me say at the beginning that these solutions need to be part of a mobility ecosystem. It allows us to do so much more with our infrastructure when we are making more efficient use of it. And that means getting people into transit systems, not bankrupting them. And second, I think you learn by doing, and that's exactly what we're doing at M-City, and we're learning about the accessibility challenges and opportunities. So we're embarking on research that actually is related to our shuttles and how to improve accessibility on all fronts for the entire journey related to that automated experience. But what we have heard from transit operators, including paratransit operators, for example, in Los Angeles, that they have a real struggle getting paratransit drivers. And that's because you have to have not only a CDL, but additional qualifications. And they're saying for them, the advent of automated vehicles would allow them to more easily provide a concierge or caregiver on board the vehicle because they don't have to do both. So it could be an opportunity in that case.
The only thing I would add is I'll take your point about mass transit. So the other solutions that we're looking at, it's not just, autonomy is one piece. So there's really, a multimodal approach. So what we're doing this today in the city of Stuttgart. We've actually partnered with the city. It's a public-private partnership. We have a multimodal app. I know app is overused, but what it does is connect the traditional public transportation solutions, whether it's rail, light rail. It also will connect it with ride sharing. And this is actually a pilot that we've been developing. It's about a year. It's actually called Move BW, which is Baden-Württemberg, the state of Baden-Württemberg, the first city to start is Stuttgart. But the idea is to test it, to learn and understand, to do exactly what you're saying, because we don't want to abandon the transit solutions that are already in cities. We want to try and augment those and improve upon those with the connected and automated vehicles.
Yeah, and I just want to add one quick thing, which is that, to Carrie's point, highly automated, connected, and at some point, fully autonomous, should be complementary to transit. It shouldn't be competitive with transit. And a lot of the technologies available will ease the path toward a transit terminus point, because a lot of people simply can't get to that transit terminus point, and we call it the first mile, last mile problem, but it could be the first 10 miles or the first 20 miles.
Depending on where you live. Yeah.
Right? So anyway. Oh, yes, ma'am.
One more thing from working with some disabled women, one of the biggest things, like if you want to go from, say, Lansing to Jackson, so from a different county, all the buses are in Ann Arbor. Everything goes to the hub to Ann Arbor, but nothing goes to the borders to the next county. So if you had a connector that went, okay, from Washtenaw to Jackson County, okay, here's your connector. Now you can go to the next county over on public transportation, but everything stops at the border. If it stops at the border, you can have a hub at the border, but nobody does that. And my friends who are in wheelchairs, that's the biggest thing. They can't get anywhere. They can't get past the border of the county in which they live.
So I don't have an easy solution to that, but I can tell you that the Council on Future Mobility will most likely be diving into that one in 2019. We have a lot of council members who are very concerned about accessibility for paratransit, for non-emergency medical transport, and it's something I think from a policy perspective we need to deal with, for sure. But if you all have something more to add to that. Okay. Yes, sir.
Hi, hello. My name is Igor. I'm from the company from Estonia, and we actually did the user experience concept for one of the autonomous vehicles upstairs. Yep. Mm-hmm. My question is, are there any researches based on from the psychology part of this aspect? Most of the autonomous vehicles will be used as a shared drive. Are there any researchers telling how to actually match people? Because I'm not going to share a drive late in the evening with a drunk teenager or something. Right. That's going to be difficult.
Why? No.
Not in the mood today. So how in the future, how is it going to be, how we will be dealing with that? Or are there any researchers how to match people together? Because that's going to be an issue as well.
Well, I'm thinking of split.
Yeah, I think your point is valid. And I probably share the same concerns, and many people do. But I think we're going to have to do a lot more testing and a lot more of, I would say, customer understanding. I mean, there's some research being looked at Maybe you can even determine who's in the vehicle, and that's part of your ride sharing, let's say, criteria. If it's an individual that's, is there somebody in the vehicle or not in the vehicle? Because even some people would prefer not to have, a passenger with them. So there's some research into that, but I think, to be quite honest, we need a little bit more time to develop really how to do that.
And I will tell you that the council has asked the Michigan State Police to think about safety and security for autonomous vehicles. So preventing a crime, and if a crime occurs, mitigating it and responding to it swiftly. And so they're drawing on a considerable amount of data that transit agencies have, transit law enforcement agencies have, and I think that is a good analogy for autonomous vehicles. And we have, technologies, machine vision, ways of monitoring what's going on in these vehicles.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so I have one. The woes of urbanization, to come back to that, the cities are throwing off a lot of information, a lot of data associated with congestion, associated with peak transit travel times where we simply can't move enough people fast enough. Piles, mountains of data. What is the opportunity with the analytics to take a stab at the woes of urbanization? How can we, just some examples maybe of how we can apply some intelligence to the aggregation, the organization, and dissemination of data?
I'll start with that. I talked about this curbside management. So the amount of data that you're going to gather from all of the ride-sharing companies that are dropping off and picking up, the amount of data that you're going to collect from the vehicles that are actually driving around there, whether they're autonomous or not, they're definitely going to be connected. And then I think if you look at the infrastructure, which I talked about earlier on, with some of the machine vision and the video analytics, there's going to be ways for determining, almost like when they're in front of a certain shop that they're coming to, this information and this data could possibly be provided to them in such a way that the person, as part of their experience, as they first end up at that curbside, they know exactly where they're going, they know exactly how much they're paying for whatever they're going after. So I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity. I think there's more opportunity than we even realize today, with what we can do with the data. But I think the one thing that we should also be very conscious of is this all needs to be either anonymous or needs to be secure data.
Right.
Everybody's concerned about data, as they should be. And one of the things that we're doing at Bosch, we actually have a brand in-house called S-Script. And all of our devices, whether they're ECUs or whether they're appliances or anything that's going to be connected as part of the Internet of Things, these will be secure, anonymous transactions, or I should say transmissions. But the data is really I think the new oil, as people like to say. So I think I think it's limitless right now.
That's great.
Yeah. No, agreed. One of the things that for the smart city in Dubai, they're looking at smart lighting. So if you're driving down the road, the light is off, but when you get ready to pass it, it turns on, so it gives you light. But when you pass it, it turns itself back off. When you start looking at using that data for knowing where you should be parking, being able to do it with traffic and understand congestion models, so that certain lights change at a different time depending on the time of day. So it's about taking the data and then really putting it in a real world environment and testing it out to make sure that it works the way that it needs to, and then look at deploying it. Because when I look at IoT, it's more like IORT. It's the Internet of relevant data, not just data for data's
You get buried by the
sake.
data,
Yeah,
right.
because you get overwhelmed with information that may not have anything to do with it, but really looking at things that you can utilize and put out that would be helpful long term.
I'll give you another example that I just came across last week at the University of Michigan. That's what makes it so fun. You never know what you're going to find. Faculty at the University of Michigan are using connected vehicle data, which actually has windshield wiper data, to report back to emergency services in the city of Ann Arbor. And what they're able to do with that data is identify there are areas within the city that have a high probability of flooding under certain rain conditions. And what they're able to do is based on the real-time data of windshield wiper activation in very precise GPS locations, they can deploy emergency services and get those roads shut down and reroute traffic with minimal disruption to the city. Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Yeah, that's a great example.
But there has to be a removal of friction, and as Frank says, it has to be secure, and we have to agree upon how we're going to share data. And I think right now we're still figuring that out.
Right.
Yes, sir. Just speak loudly.
It's coming.
Oh, you're
When things go wrong, who has the liability? Is it the auto company? Is it the passengers? Is it the owner of the vehicle? Who has the liability?
So the Council on Future Mobility actually has a legal task force that is examining that problem with our state insurance regulator and in cooperation with other states. The short answer is we're not sure yet because our tort system is not really designed to handle autonomous vehicles. We have a body of common law that deals with product liability that, is now faced with a very different fact pattern in terms of who owns the vehicle, who's operating the vehicle, is the operator the owner, and is there liability just for owning a vehicle? The certain car manufacturers, automobile companies, have announced that they would accept liability on a strict liability basis for anything that goes wrong with the vehicle if it malfunctions. Of course, it'll never malfunction, right? But if it does, then they're going to be strictly liable, and that would have implications, sad to say, for major suppliers, because no doubt the car company will drill down to whoever provided the system or subsystem that didn't work. Now, that's today. We haven't actually experienced, with minor exceptions, huge losses associated with the operation of autonomous vehicles. And so this is just my personal opinion, certainly not shared by all my fellow council members, but I believe that when you have a couple of runaway jury verdicts, it will change the landscape of who is going to be liable. But you make a really interesting point about, these vehicles will have issues. It's going to happen, right? And a lot of the issues, though, are things that, for me, are counterintuitive. So a number of crashes have occurred involving autonomous test vehicles, and they're almost always rear-enders, right? And so a human driver in a vehicle is behind an autonomous test vehicle, and the autonomous test vehicle doesn't act like a human driver. All right, and so one of the issues, and I'd love to hear the panelists talk about this in the last 1 minute we have, somehow we have to, the vehicle has to convey what's called robotic intent to pedestrians, to vehicles being operated in mixed traffic, operated by humans. Anybody?
Just going to say, so I'm a mechanical engineer by degree, and I'm now playing in the business development space. I am not a litigator, so I'm going to leave all of that litigation and liability up to the legal people who really know it much, much better than I could even answer. But I think, to your point, John, I think it will be litigated through the normal process. Technology isn't new, but we're going to have to learn how to deal with it. I think it's going to be a process through various different, I would say, litigative procedures. And yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that. That's my 2 cents.
And Carrie is on the board of the Michigan
Journal of Mobility.
Of Mobility,
yeah,
right?
I was just on a panel at TRB on Monday with my friends from the Journal. So I think we've done some research at the university with our partners and others, and what early indications, a couple of things. This relationship between who's at fault when there are multiple parties. Bosch has been doing that with their customers for years, and we don't really see any material change there. In terms of the consumer, We had a funded project with JD Power and another outside counsel, Miller Canfield, and what they found after extensive survey and discussion with the consumer, and then also basing it on the Toyota unattended acceleration, that the consumer would prefer a very quick alternative dispute resolution and not go to litigation, and they would be giving up their data and privacy to do so. In terms of how does the shuttle interact, we're finding out every day how our shuttle expresses or does not express its intent to roadway users around it, and we're recording it and collecting all of that data to learn about how we can improve those interactions between the machine and the human.
So I think it's time to stick a fork in us because we're done, right? All right, so let's thank our panelists.